In this video lesson, we're going to talk about the first principle, which is all about your mindset. Develop a growth mindset. Maybe you've already heard about the fixed and the growth mindset, which was developed by Carol S. Dweck. She actually wrote a book about this, which I can highly recommend. Maybe you already know that your mindset actually has an impact on your learning. When you have a fixed mindset, you believe that people already have a certain amount of intelligence and can't do anything about it to change it. If you have a growth mindset, on the other hand, you do not believe that everybody has like a certain amount of intelligence, and you believe that you can work on this part and grow. It's important to differentiate between I can do it and I can do it yet. I can do it is basically fixed mindset statement, and I can do it yet is basically a growth mindset statement, because it implements that you can work on getting better at what you're trying to do. This has an impact on your learning, because if you do not believe that you can do it, believe me, you won't make it in any way. But if you think that you just can't do it yet, you are able to work on yourself, work on your skills, and get better at what you're doing and achieve goals. In this context, it's also important to think about mistakes, because mistakes are super important for learning. If you don't fail, you don't learn as much. So you have to develop a mindset where you appreciate making mistakes and where you handle the mistakes to get better at what you're doing, because it's not that you can't do it, it's just that you can't do it yet. And there's a big difference, even though it's a small word. I want to talk about my own experience with developing a mindset. So there was a long time I didn't know anything about the fixed and the growth mindset, and I had no idea on the impact my mindset has on my ability to learn anything. So when I heard about the growth mindset, you bet I was pretty excited to learn a lot more about this. And when it came to language learning, I actually had to work on my mindset quite a lot. So I want to give an example of me learning Russian. For me personally, Russian is a pretty tough language. I had no previous experience with learning Russian in any way. I always had a few friends that have Russian as their mother tongue, but I never got into Russian any deeper. So when I started learning Russian, I had a lot of situations where I got super frustrated and thought I would never be able to do that. So I really had to think about my mindset and change my mindset from I can't do this to I can't do it yet. And when you have the right mindset and believe in yourself, you're actually capable of a lot of things. So I'm not perfect in Russian whatsoever. I just basically started a few months ago, but I'm pretty proud of what I've achieved now, and I've overcome all the times where I was kind of stuck because I didn't feel like I'm gonna make it. We talked about the first principle, which is develop a growth mindset. And now you can take out your sheet, take out your paper, and think about your own experience with this principle. Let's move on to principle number 2 in the next video lesson. This video lesson is all about the second principle, which is all about listening. Listen to the language you want to learn a lot. This is super important because sounds in different languages are actually pretty different. And this is actually where accents come from, because you're used to produce sounds in a different way. And when you learn a foreign language, you adapt the system that you already know to that language. If you listen to the language a lot, you will hear the sounds that you want to produce by yourself, and you will get in the melody the language has and kind of the jazz and the feeling behind it, because languages are never only about speaking. It's always about certain kind of feeling that the language gives to you. You will be able to listen to the sounds that you want to produce yourself. you will be able to understand the people that are talking the language, which is a pretty important part if you want to be able to speak to native speakers. And on the other hand, you will get a better sense of what the language should sound like, so you will be able to produce the sounds better. Additionally, you can look at little videos and pictures which show where the tongue in the mouth is placed. I can highly recommend doing this and making this part of your language learning experience, because this will help you so much in producing the sound, especially if it's a sound that you're in no way familiar with and don't know how to produce it in any way. This is also helpful if there are multiple letters or combinations of letters which are related to the sound that you try to produce. But I want to mention here that sounds and letters are by no means the same. Letters are only a system to visualize the words and the sounds that we make. So sounds are one thing and letters are another thing. But sometimes you can put them kind of together to help you to read in a foreign language. But it's important to know how the sounds are produced and not what you only think how you should read a word. Let me give you a German example, or maybe let me give you two German examples to make my point clearer. There is a letter combination which is C and H. You find this quite often in German words, but we have two different sounds that match this combination of letters. The first one is the Ich laut, Ich, and the second one is the Ach laut, Ach, Ich, Ach. You can already see when you look at my mouth that I do different things with it to articulate the sounds. Ich, Ach. But when you see the words on the paper, you don't know, if you haven't learned it, if it's the Ich or Ach sound. You have to learn which sound it is and have to learn to articulate the word, not reading the letters, because sounds and letters are not the same. Let's take the word Hund. Hund means dog. In singular it's Hund, and in plural it's Hunde. Hund, Hunde. Do you see the D in the word and hear how it sounds differently? It's a different sound. It's Hund and Hunde. T, D. It's a different sound. You don't see it when you look at the word. Additionally, I want to give you an example why listening to the language is so important. So we're going to talk about me learning Turkish. I learned Turkish actually a few years ago, and I had a friend at that time which I showed audio files that I had to send in for the course I took. She listened to one audio file and was super excited and said something like, "Wow, that's so good, you sound so Turkish." And she asked me to show her more. So I showed her more, but she wasn't as excited about the other audio files I showed to her, because she was like, no, that's not that good. First I showed her an audio file I just recorded recently, which was at a later part in that course, and I actually had listened to a lot of Turkish series and films, even though I didn't really understand what they were talking about. And the other audio file I showed to her was an audio file I recorded like basically at the beginning of taking the course. So I want to show you two audio files of me speaking Turkish during that time, so you can compare the two and see if you can hear a difference. İyi günler, iyi günler. Adın ne? Adım Tina. Soyadın ne? Soyadım Degirin. Anlamadım. Tekrar eder misin? Otelci nasıl yardımcı olabilirim diye soruyor. Müşteri 2 yataklı odanız var mı diye soruyor. In this video lesson, we talked about the second principle, which is listen to the language a lot. Grab your sheet of paper and think about your own experience with this principle. Let's move on to the next video lesson. This video lesson is about principle number 3, which is all about context. Learn in context to make things matter. If we look at the structure of the brain, it's super important to make things matter. You can imagine your brain structure kind of like a network and everything's connected. So it's pretty hard for you to remember things that are isolated and not part of the network. The more you make things matter, the more they will be implemented in your network and the better you will remember them. Additionally, I want to talk about Ebbinghaus and the forgetting curve. Maybe you've already heard of it. It's basically a curve which visualizes how fast we forget things. You say about 48 hours after learning something, you won't be able to remember everything. You will be at around 20%. So what we can take away from Ebbinghaus and the forgetting curve is if you don't make things matter, you will forget them way faster. If you make them matter, you won't forget them as fast as Ebbinghaus shows in his forgetting curve, because he didn't look at learning that actually was put in context and matters. A way to make things matter is to basically learn in context. So never learn how I learned vocabulary in school. I just can't recommend it, and it's so true that this does not work well. Don't just write down the word in your mother tongue and the foreign language you want to learn. That's actually a bad thing, because you create connections in your brain from one word to the other. Let me give you an example for German. If you want to learn the German word for table, you will learn the word Tisch. But if you only learn the connection between table and Tisch, you won't be able to think in the language, which is actually a pretty important part to be able to speak fluent in a language without always trying to translate from one language to the other language. You should learn the word Tisch when thinking of a table, and not learning Tisch because you looked at the word table. A method to bring everything you want to learn in context is working with stories or short stories. Let's talk about a few examples and my own experience. When I was in school, I basically learned every language possible. So I started learning English in 4th grade. Then I started learning Latin in, I believe, 7th grade. Then I started learning French in 9th grade, and I started learning Spanish in, I believe, 10th or 11th grade. I'm not quite sure. What I recognized during learning these languages was that my brain just tried to translate what I was thinking in German in the other language, so I can say that I was not able to think in the other languages. A pretty hard experience for me was when I took French. There were basically 2 courses at my school. The one course started at 7th grade when I started with Latin, and the other course started at 9th grade, which I was in. But when we were in, I believe, about 11th or 12th grade, they decided that they wanted to put the 2 courses together. And that was the point where it actually became pretty hard for me. I remember my teacher staying in front of us, asking a question. I was thinking about what this question means in German, thought about the answer in German, and then I thought about how to say what I wanted to say. And by that point, actually, the students that had French for additional 2 years already answered the question, and they already moved on. And I was still thinking about how to say this in French. The third principle is all about context, learning context, and make things matter. Now, once again, grab your piece of paper, grab your template, and think about your own experience with the principle. When you're done, let's move on to the next video lesson. This video lesson is about Principle 4, which is all about speaking. Focus on speaking, not on grammar. If you learn a language, you want to learn the language because you want to talk to other people. And if you want to talk to other people, you have to practice your speaking skills. A common mistake I always see, and I feel like that's kind of the things school here in Germany at least do, is focusing on grammar. But the problem with focusing on grammar is that you will be able to work on tasks about grammar and that you write a lot. But you will have a lot of problems when you try to speak the language. This has basically two reasons. One of them is if you practice writing, it's pretty hard to speak if you don't practice speaking. And another point can be that you will be afraid to make mistakes because you focus so much on the grammar and want to make it right that you are afraid to speak. But if you want to get better at speaking, you have to speak the language. And you will make mistakes, you will screw up your grammar, that's totally fine. Remember, think about your mindset. Mistakes are a common part of learning. They are important to move forward. When you speak a lot, remember to practice the sounds, remember to practice listening, so you will be able to understand the people that are talking to you, and you will be able to produce the sounds. The more you practice, the better you're gonna be. You don't actually have to move to the country where the language you want to learn is spoken. You can actually use so many other resources. For example, you maybe have friends and family which you can talk to, or you can use the internet. There are so many videos in different languages. There are so many online courses you can take. There are many apps where you can take tutoring lessons and find your own language teacher. The possibilities are endless. If you want to move to that country or you want to live there for some time or just go on vacation, definitely go do that. Expose yourself to the language and speak. Talk to the people in the language. Make mistakes as you speak and don't focus on the grammar. Believe me, you will learn the grammar as you go. You will get better and better without even noticing. For this principle, I also want to give you an example of my own experience, which I believe I will never forget. So I already told you about the many languages I learned in school or started learning in school. And I remember there was a time we had Spanish exchange students. This wasn't actually at my school, it was at the school from a boy I knew at that time. And I actually met those people and I heard them talking and we went out together, but I never, believe me, never talked to them in Spanish. I was super afraid. I was perfect at writing in Spanish. I was so good at writing in Spanish. I could analyze the whole text and write multiple pages about this text in Spanish, but I was afraid to talk. And the main reason for this was because I was so focused on writing in school. I didn't really spoke in the Spanish lessons, didn't really had to. So I was kind of still pretty good in Spanish, even though I barely talked in Spanish. And I remember this one evening where we went out and the one guy talked to me and he was like, "Oh, I never heard you talk Spanish, even though I know that you're pretty good at Spanish." And I had to think pretty hard about what I wanted to say because I was so afraid. And again, I thought in German and tried to translate what I wanted to say. It took me quite a few minutes and I felt so awkward. And I answered him in Spanish that I felt like I wasn't able to talk in Spanish. And I believe that I also said that I was afraid to make mistakes. Principle 4 is all about speaking. Focus on speaking, not on grammar. Again, grab your sheet of paper and think about your own experience with this principle. And again, let's move on to the next video lesson. In this video lesson, we're going to talk about principle 5, which is all about consistency. Be consistent. Repetition is actually a pretty important part of learning. If you repeat what you want to learn regularly, you will learn it so much better. And if it matters, think back at principle 3, you will remember it even better. Being consistent is also pretty important because, as I mentioned in the beginning, learning a language is a never-ending process. If you're not consistent and you don't really learn the language, you won't be able to get better and you won't be able to speak the language. One thing that can actually help you is creating habits about language learning. A few people also use language journals to track how many hours they spend actively learning a language. If you want to create habits, you can actually use a habit tracker to stay on top of this. Maybe your goal is to expose yourself to the language every day and spend at least 5 minutes learning. If you learn a language 5 minutes a day, it's actually more effective for your learning than spending about 40 minutes a week on language learning, but only doing this once a week. Being consistent is actually more about doing it actually more often and not only once a week or once a month. That's not that consistent. Even though you do it every month, you will get more results and will be able to learn the language better if you learn the language every day or maybe every second day. Again, I want to talk about my own experience. I actually do have a habit tracker. I want to expose myself to the languages every day, work on a little task every day. Another example I want to explain to you is actually, again, me trying to learn Russian. I want to talk about two things. The first thing is me trying to learn the Russian alphabet. This was so hard for me. My head hurt, my brain hurt. This was so tough to see letters and have a sound system in your head and trying to change it and have new letters and make words and try to read. This was so hard. But let me tell you, I didn't give up. I was consistent. I was pretty sure that my mindset was right, that I would be able to do it. And I did it. It took me a while, but believe me, I practiced every day. And I believe within a week, I was fine. I was able to read the first words. And I can tell you how proud I am. The second example I want to give you is counting in Russian. First, when I saw the words for the numbers in Russian, I was again like, oh my gosh, will I ever be able to learn these? They didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So what I did was actually I searched for a video where someone counted in Russian up to 10 at first. I watched this video. I listened to it every day, at least 2 or 3 times a day. It took me a few days, but I can still count in Russian up to 10 at least. Principle 5 is all about being consistent. As we are actually already consistent, again, grab your sheet of paper and write down your own experience with this principle. Let's move on to the last video lesson. This last video lesson is all about principle 6, reflection. Reflect your journey and your methods. Reflecting your language learning journey or learning in general is super important. Some methods that work for me won't work for you. This is why it's super important to think about what works for you and what doesn't work for you. This also has a lot to do with experience. For example, if you already learned a lot of languages, you know a lot about your way of learning languages, you know what works for you and you know which methods to choose. It can be that you try to learn a new language and realize that your methods won't work with this language that well. And if you gain more and more experience, you may realize, oh, by that point, I actually was able to learn with this method quite good. But now I'm at another point, this method doesn't work for me anymore. It's not only about methods, it's also about materials, the resources you use. You can try out new materials, new resources, try out different kind of classes, for example, but you always should think about, is this working for me? And if not, why isn't it working for me? And then it's important to make changes. Not only think about what you should change, actually change it so that you can move forward. And again, I want to give you a few examples of my own experience. We already talked about learning language in school, and I already told you that the way we learned languages there wasn't really for me. There were multiple reasons why I wasn't able to learn languages that good with the system we had. One big part for me was how we had to learn vocabulary, and I never thought about doing it another way because nobody did. Nobody knew how to do it differently. We all did it that way. And for me personally, it did not work at all because, as I already mentioned, I thought in German, translated it to another language, and wasn't able to think in the language. But I'm proud to say that has changed. I'm able to think in English, for example, quite good. Sometimes I get at some points where I don't know the word or I'm not able to think about the word and want to say it in German. But I believe that's part of being bilingual, or at least multilingual, if we want to be kind of precise with that. So if you're multilingual, I think it's totally common that you don't only think in one language and you switch at some points back and forth. On my language learning journey, I actually do try a lot of methods. So I always like to look around, looking for methods and trying things out, developing my own system and see what works for me. Sometimes it actually comes with the material I get, so that's pretty different. For example, for English, I have a book which is basically made so you can learn on your own. There are a lot of audio files and quite a few tasks you can work on, and that's one thing I'm trying out right now, see if I like the material. But it's very different from what I do, for example, with Russian. But the reason why it's so different for me is I already learned English in school. I'm mainly actually focusing on expanding my vocabulary, and on the other hand, getting better at grammar. But for Russian, it's different. Russian, for me, is not about the grammar, because if you know Russian, the grammar in Russian is pretty hard. I do not focus whatsoever on grammar. I more pick it up as I go, and I focus on speaking and expanding my vocabulary and getting more in touch with the language, but I do not focus on grammar whatsoever. You can see I do have different focuses in learning the different languages, but this has to do with the level I'm on in the languages. So I'm at a kind of pretty high level in English, and I'm a kind of more pretty low level in Russian. So I do have different methods and use different materials to learn the languages. And I constantly reflect what I'm doing and see what works for me and what doesn't, and change things up. So our last principle is about reflecting your journey and your methods. For one last time, grab your sheet of paper and your pen and write down your own experience with this principle. And when you're done, let's move on to the last part, which is the conclusion. This last part is just a recap of everything. Let's look at all the 6 principles once again. Principle 1 was all about the mindset. Develop a growth mindset. We talked about drag and the fixed and growth mindset, and we actually talked about how to handle mistakes when learning a language. Principle 2 is all about listening. Listen to the language a lot. You can listen to music or watch TV shows or films in the language you want to learn. Principle 3 is about context. Learn in context and make things matter. This is important so you will learn them actually better and don't forget them as fast. And this can also help you to learn to think in the language that you're learning. Principle 4 is about speaking. Focus on speaking, not on grammar. If your goal is to speak a certain language, you should definitely focus and practice speaking. When you focus on grammar and writing, you will have a lot of trouble actually speaking the language because you train so much in writing in that language. The 5th principle is about consistency. Be consistent. Being consistent is important so you won't forget things as fast and you will be able to learn things so much better if you repeat them. The last principle is all about reflection. Reflect your journey and your method. This is super important because everybody's different and everybody learns different. Depending on your language skills and goals, you will need different methods and materials to reach those goals. So it's important to reflect what you have, to reflect what you're doing, and modify your system in a way that will help you to learn the language even better. These are the 6 principles on how to learn a language. I thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to see what you've written down, to read about your own experience that you have with the principle. Feel free to post your class project and share with everybody. And I'm so excited to hear more about your language learning journey. Please feel free to come back and share as you learn the language. I'm so happy that we spent this time together. I hope you have a wonderful day. I wish you all the best for your language learning journey, and I'm super excited to hear and read from you.